Just when it looked like things between the two Koreas were improving, relations have soured. This time, a cross-border protest and an exchange of heavy gunfire have derailed what had briefly been an improving relationship. So, could this latest outbreak of violence spiral out of control? This is Inside Story. Well, the government in North Korea has cancelled reconciliation talks with South Korea. The decision was announced after an exchange of heavy machine gun fire across the border shared by the two Koreas. The North Korean leader, Jong-un, hasn't been seen in public since September 3rd, but 3 of his high-ranking officials attended the Asian Games in South Korea last week. Well, Kim's last public appearance was in September, when he was seen limping, raising questions about his health. Now, the mysterious disappearance from public view of North Korea's camera-friendly leader has led to wild speculation. Well, Friday marked the 69th anniversary of the founding of the North Korean Workers' Party. The event celebrates the cult of the Kim dynasty around which the North Korean state is organized. But where was the man at the center of the secretive state? Teresa Bo has more from Pyongyang.
State media in Pyongyang is reporting that the talks between North and South Korea have been put on hold after a series of balloons with leaflets were launched last Friday, and that triggered an exchange of fire. These talks were significant because it was for the first time in at least 4 years that the two countries had a possibility of starting any type of talks. Well, they were cancelled. They were expected to start in late October or early November. We've spoken to people here and they say that launching balloons with leaflets is an act of aggression against this country. We've also been going around to schools and talking to people, and the issue of reunification is very important to them. In fact, maps here show the Korean peninsula as just one country. All of this is happening amid rumors about the health of the dear leader. That's how people here refer to Kim Jong-un. He has not been seen in over a month, and the last time he was seen, he was shown walking with a limp. He has also missed the celebrations of the Workers' Party of Korea. People here are telling us that they miss their leader very much, but that he's a human being and that he has the right to be sick, but at the same time that they're expecting him to be well and to get well very soon. Teresa Bo for Inside Story, Pyongyang.
Now, as we mentioned earlier, 3 high-ranking officials from North Korea made a rare and unannounced visit to South Korea earlier this month. Well, that raised hopes of restarting a process of reconciliation. But South Korean activists released balloons carrying propaganda leaflets towards Pyongyang. Now, Pyongyang called it an act of aggression, as we just heard Teresa Bo say there. North Korea took it as a slight, leading to an exchange of heavy machine gun fire on Friday. Well, let's bring in our guests now. And joining us from Seoul is Moon Chung-in, Professor of Political Science at Yonsei University and a former advisor to South Korean Presidents Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun. From London, John Everard, the UK's former ambassador to North Korea and former coordinator of a panel of experts on North Korea at the United Nations. And from the South Korean city of Busan on Skype, Robert Kelly, Professor of Political Science and Diplomacy at Busan National University. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us today. Now, Robert Kelly, if I could start with you. It's always been this, well, Kim Jong-un has always been this mythical figure. He seems to be a real threat. Is he a threat to his regional neighbors?
I don't think that much, actually. I think that North Korea really wants regime stability at home. A war abroad would damage that. Regime stability at home ensures that the elite in Pyongyang continues to enjoy the lifestyle that they do. If there was a serious conflict in Northeast Asia between the two Koreas, presumably North Korea would probably in time lose that conflict, after which the regime in North Korea would no longer be needed and would face trials in the South. South Korea still has the death penalty. I think the real issue in with North Korea is not so much war making. I think it's North Korea's illicit and illegal activities, things like the production of methamphetamines, counterfeiting, proliferation of nuclear and missile parts, things like that.
Moon Chung-in, if I can bring you into this conversation now, how much of a threat do you see North Korea to its regional neighbors?
I really don't think that North Korea poses a real threat. I would argue that North Korea is extremely defensive with the regime security and defensive with the state security. Therefore, I really don't think that North Korea make so-called proactive provocation toward South Korea or any neighboring countries, including the United States.
John Everard, if North Korea, as we've established, is not much of a threat, why then all this fuss whenever there's a missile that's fired by Pyongyang?
Firstly, I'm not sure that I agree entirely with the other two contributors. I agree that North Korea is not a conscious threat. North Korea does not want a war and is not going to set out to start one. But it does have a long track record of trying to extract what it wants from the international community through threats of force and occasionally the actual use of force. Let's not forget that not long ago it sank a South Korean corvette and shelled a South Korean island. I think the big risk is that North Korea, which after all is an isolated state, it doesn't always understand the way the world works, one day simply miscalculates, provokes a reaction, which provokes a counter-reaction, and things quickly get out of control.
Robert Kelly, I can see you nodding there. Are you about to change your stance here and say that, yes, North Korea may actually pose a threat to its regional neighbors?
Well, it poses a threat really to South Korea, not so much its other neighbors. But no, I agree with the spiral, sort of interlocking, sort of action-reaction spiral that was mentioned by the other guest. Yeah, I mean, that's really the big concern, right? And we know North Korea does these kinds of things, but when North Korea does these kinds of things, when it sinks the ship, for example, or does rocket missile tests and stuff like that, usually it's not because they want to start a war, it's because they're looking to shake down the South for cash and aid and rice and things like that, right? I mean, this isn't sort of, every time these things happen, we hear in the media, oh, like the war is about to start. That's really not true. That's really not true because they're not going to win. What they really want is assistance and aid, and this is how they think they're going to get it, right? Now, I think the other guest mentioned a sort of possibility, which is that the South might respond and then things go back and forth and you have a tit for tat spiral that slips out of control. That's the real threat for how a conflict might start. It's not going to be an invasion, though.
Now, Kim Jong-un hasn't been seen now for more than a month, and really not much is really known about the government in Pyongyang and the machinations of his government. Robert Kelly, what do you make of his absence?
My guess, this is a big guess, right? Because we don't really know. I mean, we're really speculating here. My guess is that he's sick, as they told us that he's ill. This happens, right? Leaders get sick. His father got sick, and that the regime is on autopilot while he is in recuperation. I would doubt tremendously that there has been a coup or that he's in hiding or he's run to Beijing or something like that. My guess is, his father did this. His father disappeared for a while in the fall of 2008 when he had a stroke. And I would guess that other people are sort of stepping in to fill the gap. There's probably a minor power struggle over who exactly is signing what and pushing which papers in which direction. But that doesn't mean anything like major regime instability. If there was, you'd see it. I mean, there'd be conflict. The North Korean People's Army would be doing really foolish things, and that isn't happening, right? It looks like there's still central control. He may be sick, but that doesn't mean the regime is slipping.
John Everard, you're not seeing it that way, are you? You actually see that there's a possibility there's been a coup.
Well, I wouldn't quite call it a coup, but I think there certainly is a possibility that, I put it more strongly, the possibility that Kim Jong-un's ailments are not medical but political. I think the story about his ill health is really very thin. People are saying, for example, that he might have gout or he might have fractured his ankles. Okay, that might put him out of action for a few days, but for 5 whole weeks in a place like North Korea, I'm sorry, I just don't buy it. I think that it is possible that what has happened is that we've known from defectors that for a long time Kim Jong-un has not actually been doing the day-to-day running of the country. That has been conducted by the Korean Workers' Party, and particularly by the Organisation and Guidance Department, the OGD, which sits at the pinnacle of the Korean Workers' Party hierarchy. And I think it's possible that for some reason or other, the OGD has decided that they don't need Kim Jong-un anymore as a kind of figurehead. Now, this means that business continues as normal in North Korea. The military keep going about their business as they always have. and so do ordinary civilians, because the OGD is effectively now the regime and has been running the country for a little while. So in that kind of scenario, you would not expect to see military movements.
Moon Chun-in, what is your take on the absence? Do you think Kim Jong-un has been sidelined and the OGD has taken over?
No, I do not agree with that, that observation, because North Korea is functioning very, normally. I don't see any, abnormal, signs coming from Pyongyang, and the very fact that those three high-level guys, Hwang Byung-seo, and from the military, and Choi Ryong-hae from the party, and Kim Yang-gun from the party showed up in Incheon is a really sign of the continuing stability in North Korea. And more than that, North Korea is really run by a system rather than person. A lot of people argue that North Korea is a Kim dynasty. Despite that fact, I think North Korea is really run by the system composed of the Korea Workers' Party, the State Council, and in the military. Therefore, I really don't see any abnormal signs coming from Pyongyang.
John Everard?
No, I'm sorry. I'm listening open-mouthed to what's just been said. We have three of the most senior officials in North Korea appearing unannounced, unheralded, in Kim's private plane in South Korea. They've never done this before. This is completely untypical behavior. More, the leader of the delegation turns up in military uniform. The North Koreans never do that. They regard sending somebody in uniform as a huge concession to their interlocutors. The last time they did that was in Washington at the peak of the '94. Furthermore, he picked it up with bodyguards. You know as well as I do, only the senior leader has the right to bodyguards. Why do these people have them? They were smiling, they were chatting. North Korean interlocutors do not do that on camera. Something is changing, something very strange is going on.
John Everett, the problem is that North Korea is a hermit kingdom. Is there a possibility we might be actually reading too much into this?
It's possible. I mean, as a previous speaker said, in the end, we're speculating and we're guessing. But I don't think that the facts, such as we know them, support the theory either that this is just a temporary sickness of Kim Jong-un or that this is business as usual.
Moon Chung-in, you disagree? You don't think North Korea is close to a collapse?
No, look, the whole power, our problem is this. We try to look too deep into North Korea. Just treat North Korea as it is. And just when North Korea sends its high-level delegate and we meet them and just negotiate and settle the negotiation. The whole point is this: we tend to make all kinds of conspiracy on North Korea that create noises, which in turn make a somewhat faulty judgment on North Korea. Therefore, just treat North Korea as it is.
Robert Kelly, do you think we're reading too much into his absence?
At the moment, yeah, but I have to agree with Mr. Everard that the longer this goes on, the weirder it gets. Communist systems don't really normally function like this. It's a weird situation. I mean, we really don't know. If he doesn't show up in the next month, I would agree there's probably something pretty hairy going on. I mean, he's got to show up soon. He didn't show up at the foundation day of the Workers' Party today, and that was a pretty big deal also. I mean, he's got to come up soon, or speculation's really going to get rife.
All right.
The Chinese are sucked into it. Sorry.
Let's just go with this speculation, shall we say? And we must state that this is speculation. As I said before, this is the hermit kingdom. Not much information comes out of it at all. What would happen, Moon Chung-in, if Kim Jong-un was to disappear, shall we say? If he was no longer around?
Maybe his sister could take his place, or the military could just move into the entire, the ruling architecture, or there could be collective leadership between the military and party. North Korea would come up with a system in which would make the DPRK as a functioning state. Therefore, I really don't see that would lead to any immediate, collapse of North Korean regime or internal, chaos in North Korea.
John Everard, can DPRK actually carry on without the Kim, the cult of the Kim family?
Yes, I believe it can. I agree that with Professor Moon that we are looking not just at a one-person rule, we're looking at a system. And with or without Kim Jong-un, the system would simply keep going. I think the interesting thing is not just that it keeps going, I think we're observing that, but that we're seeing this change in stance, this change in behaviour over the last few weeks. We've talked just a minute ago about the sudden and completely unexpected arrival of the 3 very senior North Korean officials in South Korea. But there's more than that. Over the last few weeks, for the first time, long-held and fiercely defended North Korean positions have started to change. We've seen, for example, agreement to restart the dialogue on human rights with the European Union, which the North Koreans broke away from in 2005. Even more interesting, on 2 separate occasions now in the last few months, the North Koreans have been signalling that they are adopting unilaterally a policy of no first use of nuclear weapons. That's to say that they are, although they have prepared nuclear weapons, that they would not actually use them unless they faced a nuclear strike themselves. This is a big change in their position, and I think shows is a sign of a quite significant shake-up in Pyongyang.
Now, Robert Kelly, paint for us a picture of North Korea without the cult of the Kim family. If it is just a collective leadership, so shall we say, that we've suggested before, would that be then a more conciliatory North Korea? How different would that be?
I think it would be. I actually disagree, I suppose, with the other 2 speakers. I actually think the Kim monarchy is pretty central to the North Korean system. Certainly, if you visit North Korea, I mean, I've been there. I know the ambassador's been there as well. They emphasize this a great deal. I mean, Kim Jong-un called North Korea the Kim Il-sung state about a year and a half ago. The Kim family, the whole notion of the Kims as sort of like the semi-divine presence over everything is just endemic to the system. It's sort of beaten in them. And so I'm actually quite skeptical that the system would survive as we understand it without them. I suppose it could become like a collective leadership. It could become a sort of military oligarchy. That would be my guess. It would revert to some kind of military dictatorship, but then it's just a junta. Then it's just a sort of a dictatorship, and we've seen lots of those before. I do think, in answer to your question, that yes, going from the Kim monarchy, sort of the current monomania, to a military dictatorship would be a real step forward. I think military dictatorship would be more realist in its foreign policy, more realistic in dealing with its neighbors, and probably willing to strike some deals in a way that I think the Kims and the party have not been. So I would actually see a military dictatorship in North Korea as progress.
You also think that a similar way too, John Everard?
I agree with what Professor Kelly has just said. Also, I think it's important to remember that North Korea is a country where the smiles on the faces of Cheshire cats fade much more slowly than elsewhere. Remember that Kim Il-sung, who died after all 20 years ago, is still president, and his portrait is everywhere. It's entirely conceivable that you could, for a long time, have a collective leadership led by, I would say, the party rather than the military, but that's a point of debate, which nominally still pays allegiance to the Kim dynasty, but with no Kim actually any longer in charge. Just the portraits up, but not the presence.
It may certainly be a very interesting situation then. Moon Chung-in, I want to broaden this discussion a little bit more and talk about China, North Korea's closest ally, although of late really not very close, particularly after Pyongyang fired missiles towards South Korea. We're seeing that relationship, that tie between Beijing and Pyongyang sort of freeze over a little bit. How much of an impact has that had on North Korea?
I think virtually no impact at all, because China has been pursuing very skillful equidistant diplomacy vis-a-vis Pyongyang and Seoul. Despite all kinds of cacophonies, I think that Pyongyang and Beijing are in good ties, and they are in consultative mode. Of course, Pyongyang is not happy with Beijing's behavior, but I really don't think that Pyongyang would defect from Beijing, and also Beijing would not abandon the Pyongyang either. China will continue to pursue the policy of peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and the settlement of pending issues through dialogue and negotiation. At the same time, Pyongyang does not, Beijing does not want either, that Pyongyang wants neither war on the Korean Peninsula nor unification in South Korean terms. Therefore, I would say that China will continue to pursue old policy on North Korea.
Robert Kelly, are you seeing a distancing by Beijing, and is that impacting on Pyongyang at all?
Well, I think it definitely would impact on Pyongyang because really the North has no place left to go for aid and assistance. The North Korean economy really doesn't function that well. It's dominated by the military. There's racial cronyism and corruption. And so they're very dependent on external aid. They used to get it from the South or the Americans or the Japanese. All those faucets are closed. It's really only the Chinese. And if the Chinese really lock down on the sanctions, if they close the border, particularly so that the black illicit trade no longer can function, North Korea, I think, would actually enter a pretty significant budget crisis. I mean, that's another issue, but I really think that China has a lot of leverage. I also think on sort of what does Beijing think? I think there's a sort of track two kind of informal debate going on inside Beijing now about what to do about North Korea, that North Korea has become something of an albatross for China's reputation. Every time the North Koreans do something crazy, the world looks to Beijing. They say, hey, we can't do anything about it. And nobody really believes that anymore. You know, the UN Commission on Inquiry 6 months ago said that the North Korean gulag system is akin to what the Nazis did during the Holocaust. And this stuff is bouncing back on Beijing. It's sort of it's catching on because everyone knows that the Chinese are supporting the North. I mean, they've got to start thinking about what to do. Can they, you know, either pull North Korea around or are they going to have to cut it off? And I think that debate's happening. You see bits and pieces of it showing up in the media.
I want to talk about North Korea's ties with its neighbor down south as well, South Korea. Now, reconciliation talks have been temporarily halted after this exchange of gunfire. Now, Chung In-moon, you're a leading advocate of the Sunshine Policy under President Kim Dae-jung before. Back then, there was certainly more contact, more conciliatory contact between North Korea and South Korea. Do you see that coming back at any point?
Yeah, I think so. You know, the current crisis can be manageable, and if South Korea, you know, restrain from the, you know, allowing the, you know, activists to send in a leaflet into, you know, North Korea, and I think that North Korea seems to have a genuine interest in having dialogue with South Korea, and President Park Geun-hye is also interested in resuming high-level talks with North Korea. Therefore, current crisis cannot be in a perpetual impediment to the resumption of dialogue and negotiation with North Korea.
John Everard, are you just as optimistic that reconciliation talks will come back to the table?
Yes, I was saddened to hear that North Korea had postponed the talks following the exchange of gunfire because of the propaganda balloons. But I believe that this is just a temporary blip. I think that North Korea has signaled very, very clearly that it wants dialogue with the South. Sending in the three most senior officials, as I said before, is not something that North Korea has ever done before. So they've laid their cards on the table. They want to talk, and almost certainly, and this comes back perhaps to the previous conversation we're having about links with China, they will want to talk about economic aid. The Chinese have told me often that since the third North Korean nuclear test back in February 2013, they've ratcheted back on aid. And in particular, they are not giving North Korea any more cash. And we've seen the North Koreans over the past several months chase around the world, talking to the Russians, the Japanese, the Europeans, looking for somebody who is going to cover that funding gap. They've drawn a blank in all their efforts, and I think the penny has dropped that the only people who are likely to provide them with the financial support they desperately need are the South Koreans, hence the visit.
Robert Kelly, we're just running out of time here. Do you see a time when the North and South are able to engage in political dialogue on a regular basis?
It's possible. And actually, I mean, we've been talking to the North Koreans in various ways for 20-some years. I actually just don't think it really gets us a great deal. It's better than sort of not talking at all. We tried that under the last South Korean president, and it got a lot of hostility. So I'm all for conversation. I'm actually quite skeptical that it's going to take us anywhere, but engaging the North is better than isolating them because then they really misbehave and you just don't know what's going on. So keep them at the table. The status quo is better than sliding back.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for speaking with us. It's been a wonderful discussion. Thank you again. Thanks to all our guests, Moon Chung-in, John Everard, and Robert Kelly. And I'm sure you'll agree that was a very interesting discussion. Thank you so very much for watching. We would love to hear from you, so feel free to add your voice to this discussion. You can always leave your comments on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And also, we are on Twitter, so look for @AJ Inside Story. One more time, @AJ Inside Story. I'm Fauzia Ibrahim. From myself and the rest of the team, thanks for watching. Bye for now.